In a face-to-face confrontation, Pontius Pilate asked Jesus, "What is truth?" It's a good question. How do you decide what is true and what is not? How do you separate truth from error? Is truth, by definition, objective? Or is it possible that you can have your truth and I can have mine, even if our positions are incompatible? And what do we make of Jesus' statement, "I am the way and the truth and the life"? We'll try to provide some truth today on Craving Answers, Craving God. And oh, by the way, feel free to disagree. I'm Chuck Rathert with Aaron Miller. Aaron is the pastor of St. James Lutheran Church in Glen Carbon, Illinois. Aaron, do you think it's possible to identify an absolute truth, or must we just be content to get as close as possible?
I think it's important. I do think it's possible to identify an absolute truth. I don't think it's possible to fully comprehend absolute truth. We're fallen people with fallen brains that can't understand everything all the time. And so to know that I might know that something is true, but I can't know it completely. I can't know it exhaustively. I don't even know myself exhaustively. And there's two errors that we could make here. One is to say there's no such thing as truth. You can't know anything. And that's philosophical relativism. And if it's the case that we can't know anything, then what we're doing right now is just spouting your personal opinion, and my personal opinion is power play. The other mistake would be to say, oh yes, I believe that I understand everything completely. I know absolute truth, and I know it absolutely truly. And don't ask me any questions, or you can ask me questions and I'll tell you what to think. That would also be a very, very prideful mistake. It would not take into account my own personal brokenness and what theologians call the noetic effects of sin. Noetic being this word for understanding, that sin affects our understanding. None of us have a God's eye view of everything. None of us have a God's eye view of God. So yes, truth is there. It's real. I believe there is a reality that's outside of my own brain that exists, whether I believe in it or not. But I can't comprehend it completely. And so I'm going to spend the rest of my life coming to know it better and better all the time without actually ever getting to the place where I can proudly claim to know it completely.
Who are these geniuses who say that you can't know anything? Is that what you said? There, on one side of the spectrum, there are people who say you can't know anything?
Yeah.
Philosophical
relativism. Yeah. This is actually
that sounds stupid to me. Forgive me. Maybe I'm just not up to the task.
Well, no, it's not stupid. It's based upon a presupposition that there's no God. And we've told this story in here before, and this is a topic that we keep circling back to, some aspect of this topic, because it's such an important topic for our times. The question of reality, the question of truth, the question of how do you know what's right and wrong, the question of how can you tell the truth from a lie, how can you tell the truth from something that's false. We keep circling back to it. So it's worth going back to this story. We used to believe, in the West, we used to believe that God was real, and that since God was real, it was possible that there was something that was always the case, that was always true. God was always true, and the things that God said were true were always true. We killed God off in the early 17th century, Nietzsche says, and we replaced him with science. And we all agreed, when I say all, I mean a lot of people in the West, a lot of smart people, we agreed, okay, God's gone. We don't need him anymore. Superstitious. We don't need him to tell us truth. Now we have our own brains. We have reason. We have science that can get us to truth. Well, the 20th century completely gutted this philosophy. The idea that somehow the human brain and that rationality and reason and science were going to lead us into truth. That was completely undermined by the Holocaust, by the gas chambers of Europe during World War II, by the failure of science to prevent everything from worldwide disease to the Titanic sinking. We all got to the place In Europe, a lot earlier than here in the United States, but by the 1960s and 70s here in the United States, we got to the place where we no longer believed that science was an infallible purveyor of truth.
So we're back to the beginning.
Well, no, we didn't go back to the beginning. We didn't go back to God. That would have been one of our options. But as C.S. Lewis says in The Last Battle, or the dwarfs that C.S. Lewis writes about, say the dwarfs are for the dwarfs. The dwarfs used to believe in Aslan, and then Aslan was debunked, and a fake Aslan was brought in, and they believed in the fake Aslan. It was a lion in a donkey's clothing, the skin of a donkey. No, I take that back. It was a donkey in the skin of a lion.
Oh,
I messed that up. And when they realized that was a fraud, did they go back to the real Aslan? Nope. We're done with Aslan. We're done with fake Aslan. The dwarves are for the dwarves. And we've decided in the West that the dwarves are for the dwarves. We don't want God anymore. We also don't want the scientists to be in charge of us. But how do you know then what's real? How do you know if there's nothing in the center of the room to say, this is true? If the scientists, you don't believe them anymore. If the priests and the pastors, you don't believe them anymore. What? And the answer is nothing. Nothing's real except for what I decide for myself. Now, I know that's not absolutely true. It's just my own personal truth. Okay, so then what's really true? And the answer is, for a lot of people, nothing. You can't know. There's nothing. You can't. And truth claims are actually not just wrong, but they're deeply offensive.
I'm pretty sure that if I step out in front of a speeding bus, I'm going to be dead. I think I know that, but that's just me. I guess I'm not a philosophical relativist.
Yeah, well, nobody lives strictly according to their philosophy. Nobody actually, like I've said in here before, you can say, I don't believe that anything is true, but when you get in your car, you don't do that without some sort of commitment that the people who are driving in the lane opposite you in the opposite direction are not going to turn into you. You actually commit to that. You pretend like it's true. When you go home and your wife says, this is what I did today, you believe her. It's impossible to live in this. And this is one of the weaknesses of philosophical relativism is that it's impossible to actually live out. We're programmed to search for and to latch on to the truth. God designed us this way. And so
even if we don't believe in God,
even if you don't believe in God, there will be some sort of God that you create that you will base truth upon. It's unavoidable.
So you have done an excellent job, I think, of defining how obscure and difficult the business of the pursuit of truth is. If somebody really makes up their mind to look for that true thing, maybe even the objectively true thing, it's really hard work. So I think maybe we can sort of explain some of this. There's a kind of inner satisfaction that you have when you think you've identified a truth. Meditating on conflicting claims can be unsettling, and then discovering what I believe to be true, whatever that might be, can bring a sense of peace, which is kind of rewarding. So I'm going to continue to pursue that truth, even as hard as that pursuit can be, because I really want that peace. And that's what truth is for. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the side effects of truth. It's not always the case that it brings peace.
I think it's the exception that it brings peace. But when it does, it's a really good feeling.
Sometimes it's really good when it doesn't. Sometimes you have some sort of pain in your stomach, and you think for a while it might just be indigestion, and then you get worried because it's not going away, and you go and you get it checked out. And the oncologist calls you and says, you got cancer, but we caught it. We're going to need to do some radical surgery, and you're going to need to do a lot of, chemo or radiation, whatever. But the prognosis looks good. That's a horrible feeling to hear you have cancer. It's a horrible feeling to go through chemo or radiation therapy, surgery to get rid of the cancer. But it's true, and it's what's necessary. And I guess you could say that, the end goal is to have it's an inner peace. It's a feeling of peace. That's good. But it's more than just a feeling of peace that the truth brings. It's a connection with reality that's more holistic than just how you feel. It's, when you get the right mixture of fertilizer for your yard and your yard finally flourishes, it's not just a good feeling inside. It's also, now my yard outside of me is looking good. Now the labor that I put into my yard is paying off. It's this holistic thing. When we come in contact with truth and comport our lives in such a way that it connects with the truth, there's a sense of what the Old Testament calls shalom, which isn't just inner peace. It's this sense that, like, my place in the world, I found my place in here, and I fit in, and everything is working the way it's supposed to work. So the pursuit of truth, that's always the goal of it. But you can't pursue that as a goal. You have to pursue truth as its own good. And then, I guess goal is the wrong word. It's a side effect. The peace, the shalom, is a side effect of the pursuit of truth, but it's definitely a part of it. You're right.
So as we record this today, we're in late summer. We're in the midst of a political season, and one doesn't have to work very hard to hear two opinions on a subject that are diametrically opposed, about which each advocate claims to be true. And so for the person who pursues truth, he begins the quest to separate truth from error. I assume that you've done this. I assume that you have a process as you pursue truth in whatever it is you're thinking about. What's your process? How do you do it?
I think there's a few steps. It's complicated. There's a few steps to sussing out what's true and what's false. One is, this isn't actually a step, it's just a preliminary. One is the humility which says, I don't know. I can't know everything. I can't fact check competing stories. At some point, I'm going to have to rely on something. I can't figure this. I can't figure all this out myself. We'll come back to that in a second. But one of the things I think it's worthwhile doing is asking the question, where is this particular truth claim coming from? Somebody says something is true. Candidate X says that candidate Y is a liar about this. And candidate Y says, no, X is lying about this. And you got to ask yourself, one of the things you have to ask yourself the question is, what's the motive? What is the motive behind this claim? And with politicians, it's almost always power. Almost always politicians say things to get power. And it's not hard to see this. Claims that, we represent, almost all politicians, especially on a national stage, claim to represent, the working person or middle or lower middle class. They decry the excessive power that the rich have while they themselves own multiple homes. When you see what they're doing and what they're saying, you can see that what they're doing and saying is they're not giving you truth because you need truth. They're talking to you because they want your vote. So that's the one thing, is to ask, what's behind this? What's this truth claim? What's the end goal? If somebody walks up onto my front porch and knocks on the door and says, I'm selling solid gold watches for $2, I instantly know that this person is saying this because they want my money. That's what they're there to sell me. They're not there because they thought I needed a solid gold watch. They're there because they're trying to sell me a solid gold watch. They need my money. And so asking, what's the motive behind what they're saying? Now, it gets tricky because there's a lot of emotions. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this topic today was exactly because we're in election season. There's a lot of emotions tied up here, especially for people who have become to deeply identify with candidate X or with candidate Y, because guaranteed candidate Y has been telling you that candidate X is the worst thing that can ever happen. And if candidate X gets in power, our country's over. This is the most important election in the history of elections. And what they've done is they've tapped into your fear. They've tapped into your emotions. You cannot think about truth in a proper way if you're controlled by your emotions. It's just impossible. If you are consumed with fear or with anger, you will not be able to grapple with truth. You won't be objective enough to search for objective truth. And so, here's the other thing. If they're trying what's the word I'm looking for? The other standard, the other test. If somebody's making a truth claim and the basis of their truth claim is negative emotions, fear or anger. Now, politicians do this. If you vote for candidate X or for candidate Y, your country is going to be gone. You're going to live in a horrible fascist or communist dictatorship, one or the other. Ad people do this. Advertising people do this. They stir up fear by convincing you that if you don't buy this service, your identity is going to get stolen. If you don't buy this car, like the neighbors are going to look at you like, what are you doing driving that piece of junk? They're stirring up like the fear of alienation, the fear of lost security.
All based on many things that are probably demonstrably untrue.
Untrue, but they have to do that because that's how they get their money. That's how they get their power. And we could talk about sex too. We could talk about, and there's just really not time to do that, but we could talk about sussing out truth claims based upon lies, based upon idolatry. So, I had this conversation with people at my church, and what it comes down to is this: honestly, you can't trust politicians. And
there's a revelation.
You can't trust priests and pastors, and you can't trust advertising people.
Did you just put priests and pastors in the same category as politicians?
Yes, you can't.
What do you know that I don't know?
Oh, anybody who's been around priests and pastors long enough will know that it might be a little bit more subtle. There might be more honest priests and pastors than there are politicians. But there are priests and pastors who want power and who will stir up fear in order to get power and will manipulate truth in order to get power. And so, honestly, you just can't trust anybody because everybody's got an angle. I'm not trying to be despairing. I'm saying this. The only person you can trust is God. The only person you can trust is God. And I encourage my congregation, when I preach the Bible to them, I want to build up a relationship with them such that they know that I will be as committed to the pursuit of the knowledge of God as possible so that they can learn and participate, as I preach, participate in this pursuit with me. But they have to constantly be weighing what I say from the pulpit against God's word itself, because I am prone to error, and not just prone to mistakes. I'm prone to saying things to manipulate people. I'm prone to saying things because I know that people want to hear certain things, and I'm going to say those things to make them happy. I'm prone to preach sermons in order to magnify myself instead of truth, instead of the pursuit of God. And so there's only one place you can trust. It's not politicians, and it's not any sort of organizations. It's only God, and it's only his word.
Okay, well, we're on the subject of pastors and the subject of the Bible. The Bible is just full of truth claims. It's just from Genesis to Revelation, one truth claim after another. Maybe you could kind of sift it down and categorize it, but it's a truth book is the way I look at it. Yet theologians, pastors, as you mentioned, Christians, lay people, they differ greatly on the truth that the Bible teaches. If these stark differences remain between Christians, between denominations, between world religions, how am I supposed to properly extract pure biblical truth when I go to the scriptures?
Same way that we talked about before. Look for what is in it for this person who's saying this. What are the emotions that are being used here? Sometimes the emotion isn't necessarily a manipulative emotion. People honestly get caught up in they identify with a particular interpretation of Scripture, and that becomes a part of their heritage. It becomes a part of their it's their memories of their childhood. It's their memories of their grandma who used to worship with them in a particular way. And now they have a hard time actually pursuing the truth because they're trying to hold on to those memories. But so it's basically the same way. You look at the truth claims in Scripture, and then you sit with the other person and you look at these truth claims and see why is it that they're saying what they're saying, and hopefully they're having the same attitude towards what you're saying, and then weighing those things out against reality. Now, this is all very vague because actually your question was very vague, and
thank you very much.
I've heard this a lot. No, I think it's helpfully vague because I've heard this a lot. I've heard people say, well, yeah, you can't trust the Bible because people read the Bible and lots of different people read it and they all disagree about it. And my response is always, okay, which parts are you talking about? This guy this main character here in the middle of it, his name is Jesus. Like, do people disagree about that? Oh, no, that's just written. That's right down there. We agree with it. Okay, so that's not one thing that people disagree about. Okay, what about he rose from the dead? It's a little bit tougher. Almost everybody throughout history who's read this has said, oh yeah, even people who disagree with it have said, oh yeah, this story is claiming that this guy died and then came back to life and rose from the dead. Now, you will talk to some Christians, I'm putting Christians in scare quotes as I say that, who will say, no, it's just metaphorical. It's just metaphorical. Okay, now, somebody says the resurrection of Jesus didn't really happen. It's just a metaphor for the surprising resiliency of the spirit of man in the face of hardship. It's just a metaphor for when times are tough, you got to get up and you got to go. You have to just really keep trying. And I would say, okay, so let's look at the story. What does it say? Now, why are you saying that? Why is somebody saying that? And the reason why, historically, when I say historically, the past 300 years since the God is dead movement, the people say, oh no, Jesus didn't really rise from the dead, it's just a metaphor, is because they believe the supernatural can't happen. Now, the story says it happened, but they believe it can't, so they'll just kind of filter that out. Or they believe, I kind of want to live my life, and I want to do what I want to do, and there's a difference between a Jesus who rose from the dead, really, and is now Lord of the universe and demands my worship. There's a difference between that and a Jesus who didn't really rise from the dead, but we tell these stories like he did to kind of like give us encouragement. I can still live my life with that second type of Jesus. He didn't really rise from the dead, but the resiliency of the human spirit. Well, I can still do what I want with that. But Jesus who rose from the dead is now Lord and King of the universe, I kind of have to obey him. What's the motivations? And if you dig a little bit in conversation, you'll find their motivations don't correlate with what's actually happening in the text. And so it just depends. And then there'll be some stuff like Christians disagree about the different order of events when Jesus returns. Okay, we just don't have enough data. And so it's easy to say, well, you might be right, I might be wrong. We just don't have enough data. And that's something different than the bigger disagreements. But back to your question and why I said it's helpfully vague, I would talk about specific instances, specific places where people disagree. And this is another reminder, and I don't know if we're going to get into this, and I realize I'm kind of droning on here, but let me just say this one more time. Truth is not a math problem that you figure out and now you have. Truth is something that you live in and you explore your whole life. You and I never actually get to absolute truth. We live in it. We chase it. We get better and better at it, but we never actually get to where we honestly, I completely comprehend God. And if what the Bible says about God is true, we never, ever will. Even in the new creation, we'll be constantly getting to know God better and better. We'll never get to a place where we can say, I 100% have complete comprehension of absolute truth. We'll always be chasing it because it's a relationship. And so just to get into it, so what happens if you believe that something is true and you find out you're wrong? You change your mind. You switch your beliefs. That's a part of the pursuit of truth. You reevaluate. And you keep on going. And that's just the way it works. There's a reason why we don't make statues of people before they die. Because something might happen near the end of their life that you're like, man, that person actually was embezzling money for all those years. We thought that they were this great person. Now we got to go down and take. Knowledge is the same way. Don't ever erect a statue to your own pursuit of knowledge. It's never over. You should always keep living it and getting better at it.
In his gospel, the Apostle John references truth no fewer than 23 times. In the John 8, verse 32 passage, Jesus says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So just when I had decided that, just as you described, this lifelong pursuit of truth that never ends and continues to evolve, can I use that term? Just as I feel like, well, it's elusive, vague, as you said. And then along comes Jesus. He says, you will know the truth. That's a pretty clear statement. So now what do I do?
Yeah, so this is a great way to point out there's two models of knowing. The one that I've been poking at is horrible and has been the cause of a lot of psychological trauma and honestly, a lot of I'm reading Simon Schama's fantastic book right now on the French Revolution called Citizens. The belief that we can actually know things. We can figure out truth, and our reason can be kings. Actually led to the death of thousands and thousands of people in 18th century France, early 19th century France. This has been about the idea that knowledge is about like facts you can figure out. And once you have them, you know them. So if somebody says, I know that God exists, your first response is, prove it. Give me the formula. I won't believe it until you can prove it. That's one model of knowing. It actually doesn't work. You can't know anything by facts like that. Knowledge, even if you like, well, I've given this example here before. Let's say that you're a technology person and there's some sort of problem with your computer that you're trying to solve and you don't know how to solve it. And you read this big handbook about how to fix this particular problem. You don't actually have the knowledge of fixing that problem, even if you know the steps and the facts of it, until you actually sit down and you start punching stuff into the keyboard and you get into the system and you do it. Knowledge is way more about doing something than it is about knowing things in your head, facts in your head. We don't say, I know how to drive a stick shift just because you know the steps of driving a stick shift. When you say, I know how to drive a stick shift, you mean I can actually sit in a car that's a manual transmission and make it go. That's what you mean. I can do it.
And it's always rough the first time and then gets better after that.
That's what I'm saying. Don't put up a statue until the hero's dead. It's always a process of getting in better and better and better. But here's the second way of knowing, the one that Jesus is talking about. It's not about facts in your head. It's about a relationship. You will know the truth, he says. But then later on, he says, I am the truth. You'll know me. Now, does that mean that we comprehend Jesus in our head? No, that's not the way relationships work. We know things about him in our head, but knowing Jesus is being in his presence, experiencing him, getting to know him better and better. Knowing the truth is way more like having a best friend or being married than it is like reading a textbook and understanding it. It's something that you get better and better at all the time, the more that you sit in it, because it's a relationship.
Again, from John's Gospel in the 14th chapter, 6th verse, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. So I guess when I think of truth, I think of things, I think of claims, various positions, different views, arguments. I don't think of persons, typically, when I think of truth, except because of John 14, except for Jesus. In the context of this discussion we're having here, what does it mean that truth is personified in the man Jesus?
Yeah, that's great. Jesus is the truth. He's the truth.
What does that mean?
It means that he is ultimate reality. He is the one real thing. That everything about him is right. Everything about him is shalom engendering. And everything that goes against him is false. And so this is why I say you cannot ever put your faith and trust in a political candidate. You can never do it. Even if you say, well, they're the best one out of the two, the other one's really bad. You can't do it. That person is false. All of us are false. I myself am false. I try to be as good a pastor, as good a husband, as good a friend as I can, but I will let my wife down. I will let my congregation down.
Let me just stop you right there, because when you say I myself am false, I understand the context of we are all sinners. We all do wrong things, think wrong things. But, you know, you're the pastor here. I know the people here. They don't think you're false.
Well, hopefully this is why. Hopefully it's because I've led them to Jesus. It's not my truth that's at stake here. I am by nature a dishonest person. But if I can lead people to Jesus at our church, if I can lead my family to Jesus, they will look at me and say, there is truth there. I will get the benefit of the afterglow of the truth of Jesus. But only to the extent that I lead my congregation to Jesus am I being truthful, a person of truth. Only to the extent that I, in my own speech and my behavior and my thoughts, manifest and embody the truth of Jesus, will I be true. Look, if I get up in my pulpit and I say, hey, you should vote for President Trump or you should vote for Vice President Kamala Harris, I will be a liar. Because I will not be manifesting truth. I will be representing the lies of two other fallen human beings, however good those people might be. If I get up there and I say from my pulpit, if I say, you know what? We haven't been trying hard enough, people. We need to be nicer to our neighbors. Let's get out there and be nice to our neighbors. I will not be telling the truth because I will be encouraging people who are by nature not nice to their neighbors to try harder at something they can't do. But if I get in the pulpit or if I say to my family, the only source of hope in life or death is Jesus, the crucified Messiah, people will look at me and they will say, that's the truth. That guy's telling the truth. But it won't be because I'm a truthful person. It's because I'm pointing to the ultimate gold standard truth. And this is how this works in all of our relationships. If somebody at their job, if somebody comes in and says, if somebody's working at, let's say they're working as an auto mechanic, and somebody comes in and they say, there's something really wrong with my car, and I don't know what it is. Can you take a look at it? And this mechanic takes a look at it and says, oh, I can probably fix this for $50. But I don't think they'll disbelieve me if I tell them it's a $1,500 job. So I'm going to do that. We would call them a liar. If somebody says, you know what, I can fix this for $50. I'll do it for $50. We call them truthful, but it's only because they are matching up with the reality that Jesus has created. Jesus in his sovereignty has let this car have a problem to the tune of $50. If I, as an auto mechanic, am not participating in that reality, that's aside from the fact that I'm called to be a truth teller like Jesus is. If I don't do that, then I am not manifesting Jesus. If I, as an auto mechanic, as a Christian auto mechanic, say, this is the problem with this car, God in his wisdom has allowed this car to have a $50 problem, I'm going to side with God and charge these people $50 for it. I'm telling the truth. But I'm only doing that because I reflect Jesus. Now, if I'm an unbelieving auto mechanic who just tells the truth because it's the right thing to do, same thing, even if they don't believe in Jesus, they are saying, this is the reality that exists. I'm going to charge this. This is God's reality. If I try to do something different in order to get more money, I'm telling a lie, but it's because I'm subverting God's reality. I'm not working for the way, the truth, and the life. We as Christians are called to represent the truth. And when we do, we get to share in the afterglow of that truth itself. And hopefully people will call us truthful people, but only to the extent that we're participating in God's reality.
You know, we could probably be done now. You did, I think you did with fine clarity, settle on the point of why we have these discussions. And I would summarize that by saying, tell me if I misquote you or misrepresent you. Stop looking inside yourself for these truths. Look outside yourself. If you want absolute truth, real truth, look unto Jesus, which the book of Hebrews says, the author and perfecter of your faith. And we could be done. But I'm thinking about that one or two people that might be listening to us right now who started listening to the podcast, heard me talk about these various questions that we're going to address today. And they said to themselves, oh, this will be good. I need to know the method. Give me the method. I'm upset in my soul about a lot of things that I can't just figure out. I can't get my hands on the truth. That's all I need to do. Give me the method. And they listened to us, and now they get to the end, and our answer has been, look unto Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith, and they're going to leave this podcast discouraged. What would you say?
Well, I'd say, first of all, what I've tried to do and what we've tried to do in previous episodes is to say, first step, you have to get out of the first framework of knowledge I told you about. You have to get out of the mindset that knowledge is facts I can get in my head or methods. Give me 3 steps. And knowledge doesn't work like that. Knowledge is a relationship. Look, it's the same way if somebody comes to me and they say, look, I cheated on my wife. She is furious. I told her I did it. She's furious. Look, you got to give me 3 things I can do to fix this. 3 steps. I need to go home and make it all right. 3 steps. I'll say, I only got 3 steps for you. You know what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to go home tonight and say, I am so deeply sorry for what I've done. Will you please forgive me? And all the anger that you have for what I've done, I'll live in it. I deserve it. Give it to me. I want to carry that anger with you and for you. And then you're going to have to go back home tomorrow night and do the exact same thing again. And the next night and the next night and the next night. And you're going to have to do that for an untold number of nights until she starts to see that you're trustworthy. I ain't got 3 steps for you. This is about relationship. You're going to have to live in this thing that you've caused. Now, the analogy is not that we've caused a bunch of pain, but it's this. The only way to get at truth is to live with Jesus. There's no method. You just got to go to the one true thing in the universe and say, I'm here. I'm not leaving. Jesus, I need you. Form and shape me. I know it's going to take years, decades. I promise I'm not going to build the statue. It's going to take a lifetime and even an eternity to come and be shaped and formed by you the way that I need to be in order to be a truthful person. But I'm not leaving until you do it. And just decide I'm living in this reality until God makes it real. And he's going to make it more and more real the longer that we are in his presence. But that's really that you got to do. It's not head information. It's relationship. And that's what knowledge is. And just to learn to sit in that and to trust in that.
You've been listening to Craving Answers, Craving God. We thank you for spending some of your precious time listening to our humble podcast. Recently, I had the pleasure of meeting a Florida listener who told me he appreciates our effort. We are grateful to God and to him for his encouragement. For Pastor Aaron Miller and production manager Larry O'Leary, I'm Chuck Rathert.